They called her delusional. They said she was walking into a slaughter. In the high-stakes world of New York divorce courts, you don't represent yourself against a shark like Bruno Sterling, especially when he's hired the deadliest lawyer in the city. Everyone in Department 42 expect a massacre. They expected Jessica Sterling to cry, sign the papers, and disappear into poverty. Bruno certainly did. He even laughed out loud when she stood up. But he forgot one thing. The person who builds the empire knows exactly where the bodies are buried. What happened over the next 3 days didn't just silence his laughter, it stunned the entire legal system and exposed a secret so dark, the judge threatened to have everyone arrested. This is the story of the wife who played the fool only to checkmate the king. The laughter wasn't subtle. It was a rich, throaty sound that bounced off the mahogany walls of the Superior Court of New York Department 42. It was the sound of a man who had never lost a day in his life. Bruno Sterling leaned back in his Italian leather chair, smoothing the lapel of his $3,000 charcoal suit. He turned to his attorney, Silas Blackwood, a man known in legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway, and whispered loud enough for half the room to hear. "Look at her, Silas. She's wearing that dress I bought her for a charity gala 5 years ago. It's pathetic. She thinks she's in a movie." Silas Blackwood, a man with silver hair and eyes like chipped flint, didn't laugh. He just smirked, tapping his gold fountain pen against the heavy oak table. "Let her play pretend, Bruno. It makes the kill easier. Judge Henderson hates time wasters. She'll be held in contempt before lunch." Across the aisle at the plaintiff's table sat Jessica Sterling. She looked small. The courtroom air conditioning was blasting, and she shivered slightly. Unlike the defense table, which was cluttered with paralegals' laptops and stacks of bound evidence, Jessica's table was empty, save for a single yellow legal pad and a plastic cup of water. She kept her head down, her brown hair pulled back in a severe, sensible bun. To the casual observer, she looked like a defeated woman, a housewife who had been traded in for a newer model, specifically Bruno's 24-year-old personal assistant, Tiffany. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The heavy door behind the bench swung open, and the Honorable Judge William P. Henderson swept into the room. Henderson was an old-school jurist. He had zero patience for theatrics, and even less for incompetence. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the docket. "Case number 49-2 Sterling v. Sterling," Judge Henderson grumbled. "We are here for the final hearing on asset division and spousal support. Appearances." Silas Blackwood stood up smoothly, buttoning his jacket. Silas Blackwood, representing the respondent. "Mr. Bruno Sterling, Your Honor." The judge looked to the other table. And for the petitioner, Jessica stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh noise in the quiet room. Bruno chuckled again, covering his mouth with a well-manicured hand. "Jessica Sterling, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. "Representing myself." Judge Henderson peered over his spectacles. He sighed a long, weary exhale that signaled he was already dreading this trial. "Mrs. Sterling, I am going to ask you this once, and I want you to listen carefully. Your husband is the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. The marital assets in question are estimated in the tens of millions. Mr. Blackwood here has been practicing law for 30 years. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed pro se? You are bringing a knife to a nuclear war, madam." I can't afford an attorney." "Your Honor," Jessica said, looking down at her hands. "Mr. Sterling cut off my access to the joint accounts 6 months ago." Silas Blackwood shot up. "Objection. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling merely secured the assets to prevent frivolous spending. We offered Mrs. Sterling a generous settlement of $50,000 to cover her transition. She refused it out of spite." 50,000. The judge raised an eyebrow. For an estate of this size, it's more than she came into the marriage with, Silas said smoothly. She was a waitress when they met, Your Honor. She has no financial literacy. We are trying to protect the estate. I see, the judge said. He looked at Jessica. Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise you to reconsider the settlement. If you proceed, you will be held to the same standards as a practicing attorney. I will not hold your hand. If you fail to object, evidence gets in. If you fail to file the right motions, you lose. Do you understand? Jessica looked up. For a split second, the fear in her eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by something colder, something harder. But it was gone so fast, Bruno missed it. I understand, Your Honor, she said. I'm ready. Bruno leaned over to Silas. Watch this. She's going to cry in 10 minutes. Mr. Blackwood, your opening statement, the judge ordered. Silas Blackwood walked to the center of the room. He didn't use notes. He was a performer. Your Honor. Silas began, his voice baritone and trustworthy. This case is simple. It is a tragedy, yes, but a simple one. Bruno Sterling is a visionary. He built Sterling Dynamics from a garage startup into a global logistics empire. He worked 18-hour days. He missed holidays. He sacrificed everything for the success of the family. Silas gestured accusingly at Jessica. And what did his wife do? She stayed home. She attended luncheons. She spent his money. And now that the marriage has unfortunately broken down due to irreconcilable differences, she wants half. She wants to dismantle a company that employs thousands of people just to fund a lifestyle she did nothing to earn. We will prove that a pre-nuptial agreement exists, one that she claims to have lost, and that her contributions to the marriage were negligible. We ask the court to limit support to the statutory minimum and grant Mr. Sterling full retention of the company shares. He sat down. It was a strong standard opening. It painted Bruno as the hard-working hero and Jessica as the leech. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said. Your opening statement. Keep it brief. Jessica walked around the table. She didn't go to the podium. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the aisle. She held her yellow notepad against her chest like a shield. My husband, Bruno, she started, her voice shaking. He says I did nothing. He says I was just a waitress. That is true. I was a waitress at the Blue Diner on 4th Street when we met. Bruno rolled his eyes. Here comes the sob story, he thought. But, Jessica continued, taking a breath, the law in this state speaks of a partnership. It speaks of good faith. Bruno is asking you to believe that he built Sterling Dynamics alone. He is asking you to believe that the $50 million in the Vanguard Trust doesn't exist. The room went dead silent. Silas Blackwood's head snapped up. Bruno froze. What trust? Judge Henderson asked, leaning forward. The Vanguard Trust, Your Honor. Jessica said, her voice stabilizing. And the shell company in the Cayman Islands registered as Blue Ocean Holdings, and the 3 commercial properties in Seattle purchased under the name of his driver, Thomas Miller. Bruno's face went from smug to purple in the span of 3 seconds. He slammed his hand on the table. That's a lie, she's lying. Mr. Sterling, sit down, the judge barked. He turned his gaze to Jessica. The pity was gone, replaced by sharp interest. Mrs. Sterling, those are serious allegations. Alleging hidden assets without proof is a quick way to get your case dismissed and pay the other side's legal fees. I know, Your Honor, Jessica said. She walked back to her table and picked up a single document. I don't have a law degree, but I do have the invoices, and I have the bank transfer records." She handed a paper to the bailiff. "Marked as Exhibit A," she said softly. Silas Blackwood snatched the copy from the bailiff. His eyes scanned the page. It was a wire transfer record, a transfer of $4 million from Sterling Dynamics to a generic account in the Caymans. Silas looked at Bruno. "You told me the accounts were clean," he hissed. "They are," Bruno whispered frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. "That account is encrypted. There's no way she could have that. She doesn't even know how to use Excel." Jessica sat back down. She looked at Bruno, and for the first time she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just set the trap. "Call your first witness, Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. "And this better be good." The air in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer a slaughter. It was a brawl. Silas Blackwood was a seasoned veteran, though. He knew how to recover. He shoved the paper into his briefcase, dismissing it as a forgery or a misunderstanding to be dealt with later. "I call Mr. Anthony Rossi to the stand," Silas announced. Anthony Rossi was Bruno's CFO, Chief Financial Officer, a man with a nervous twitch and a suit that cost more than Jessica's first car. He took the oath. "Mr. Rossi." Silas began pacing. "You manage the finances for Sterling Dynamics, correct?" "I do," Rossi said. "Are you familiar with the plaintiff's claims regarding hidden assets in the Cayman Islands, or a Vanguard trust?" "I have never heard of such things," Rossi lied smoothly. "Our books are audited annually. Everything is above board. Mrs. Sterling is likely confusing standard operating expenses with whatever fantasy she has cooked up." "Thank you," Silas said, looking at the judge. "You see, Your Honor, a misunderstanding of complex corporate finance." He turned to Jessica. "Your witness?" Jessica stood up. She didn't bring her notepad this time. She walked right up to the witness stand. She looked Anthony Rossi in the eye. Rossi shifted in his seat. He had known Jessica for 10 years. He used to come over for Christmas dinner. He knew she made a great lasagna. He didn't know she could read a balance sheet. "Hello, Anthony," Jessica said. "Mrs. Sterling?" He nodded stiffly. "Anthony, do you recall the corporate retreat in Aspen in 2021? Yes, I was there. Do you remember giving me your laptop to hold while you went skiing because you were afraid to leave it in the hotel room safe?" Rossi blinked. "I might have. I don't recall." "I recall it," Jessica said. "You were very drunk that night, Anthony. You told me the password was your daughter's birthday, July 14th, 2012. A71. 2. "Objection," Silas shouted. "Relevance. I'm getting there, Your Honor," Jessica said calmly. "Anthony, is it true that Sterling Dynamics utilizes a software called Shadow Ledger for internal accounting?" Rossi's face drained of color. That is an industry-standard tool." "Is it?" Jessica pulled a piece of paper from her stack. "Because I did some research. Shadow Ledger is a dual-entry bookkeeping system designed specifically to maintain 2 sets of books, one for the IRS and one for the owners. Is that correct?" I take the 5th," Rossi stammered. The courtroom gasped. "You can't take the 5th Amendment in a civil divorce trial regarding corporate procedure unless you are admitting to a crime," Mr. Rossi, Judge Henderson boomed. "Answer the question." It has that capability," Rossi whispered. "And," Jessica continued, relentless, "on the night of December 14th, 2023, just 3 days before Bruno filed for divorce, did you oversee a transfer of $6 million labeled consulting fees to a company called Orion Group?" "Bruno told me to," Rossi blurted out, looking at his boss in panic. "He said it was for future expansion. And who owns Orion Group, Anthony?" "I don't know," Rossi lied. Jessica turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit B. It is the Articles of Incorporation for Orion Group, registered in Nevada. She placed the document on the overhead projector. The name on the registration was clear for everyone to see. The courtroom erupted. Bruno buried his face in his hands. Tiffany Miller was the mistress. Order, order. Judge Henderson slammed his gavel. He glared at Bruno Sterling. Mr. Blackwood, control your client and your witnesses, or I will start issuing sanctions that will make your head spin. Silas Blackwood looked at Bruno with pure venom. You told me the girl wasn't involved in the financials, he hissed. She's not, Bruno whispered back, terrified. I just used her name. I didn't think Jessica would find it. She's a housewife. Silas. She knits. Jessica returned to her table. She sat down and took a sip of water. Her hand was shaking violently now. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her nauseous. She looked at Bruno. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was looking at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. He looked like a man who had walked into his own house and found a stranger sitting in his chair. But Jessica knew this was just the beginning. Exposing the money was the easy part. The hard part was proving why she deserved it. Because Bruno had one card left to play, a card that could destroy her reputation and leave her with nothing regardless of the money. Silas stood up. He adjusted his tie. He looked dangerous now. The smirk was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating look of a predator who had been wounded. Your Honor, Silas said, his voice icy. We would like to move past the financials for a moment. We would like to address the issue of conduct. We call Mrs. Jessica Sterling to the stand. Jessica froze. This was it. The cross-examination. She stood up and walked to the witness box. Mrs. Sterling. Silas began walking close to her, invading her personal space. You seem very knowledgeable about your husband's business today. Surprisingly so. I pay attention, Jessica said. Do you? Silas smirked. Because according to a sworn affidavit from your former psychiatrist, Dr. Eris Thorne, you suffer from paranoid delusions. Is it not true that you were institutionalized in 2018 for a mental breakdown? The room went silent again. This was the dirty laundry. I sought help for depression, Jessica said quietly. I lost a child. Ah, yes, Silas said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. A tragedy. But during that time, you accused your husband of spying on you. You accused him of gaslighting you. You were medicated, were you not? Yes. And isn't it true, Silas leaned in, that you have a history of fabricating stories to get attention, that you are in medical terms an unreliable narrator? Jessica looked at the judge, then at Bruno. Bruno was grinning again. This was his narrative. Crazy Jessica. Sad, crazy Jessica. I was medicated, Jessica said, her voice strengthening, because my husband was gaslighting me, and I can prove that too. How? Silas laughed. With more stolen documents. No, Jessica said, with the recordings. Silas stopped laughing. What recordings? The state of New York is a one-party consent state for audio recording. Jessica cited the law perfectly. For the last 2 years of our marriage, I carried a digital recorder in my pocket. Every threat, every admission, every time Bruno told me he would destroy me if I ever tried to leave. I have it all. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black USB drive. Exhibit C, Your Honor, she said. Bruno jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over. She can't do that. That's Private Silas. Stop her. Sit down, the judge roared. Mr. Blackwood, if your client speaks one more time out of turn, I will have the bailiff gag him. The judge turned to Jessica. Mrs. Sterling, you are telling me you have audio evidence of the respondent admitting to... What exactly? Jessica looked straight at Bruno. Admitting to the fraud, Your Honor, and admitting that he paid Dr. Thorne to falsify my diagnosis to keep me under control. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. Even the court reporter stopped typing. "Play it," Judge Henderson ordered. The bailiff took the USB drive from Jessica's trembling hand. He plugged it into the court's AV system. A projection screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a simple media player interface. Judge Henderson leaned back, his face unreadable. "Mr. Blackwood, I am allowing this under the crime-fraud exception to marital privilege. If this recording contains evidence of a crime, your objection is overruled before you even make it." Silas Blackwood didn't object. He was too busy staring at his client. Bruno was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a man watching a bomb countdown he couldn't stop. "Play it," the judge said. The courtroom speakers crackled with static, and then a voice filled the room. It was unmistakably Bruno Sterling. The audio was clear, recorded in a space, with an echo, likely their high-ceilinged master bathroom. "Stop crying, Jessica. It's pathetic. You really think anyone is going to believe you? You're a high school dropout who got lucky. I know what you're doing with the Cayman accounts, Bruno. I saw the papers in your briefcase. You saw papers you don't even know what you're looking at. But let's say you do. Let's say you tell someone. Who are they going to believe, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or the hysterical housewife who spent a month in a psych ward? You put me there. You told Dr. Thorne to say I was paranoid. I didn't tell him anything. I bought him. $50,000 is a lot of money for a shrink with gambling debts. He'll write whatever diagnosis I want. Paranoia, schizophrenia, bipolar. Take your pick. If you try to touch my money, Jessica, I won't just divorce you. I will have you committed permanently. I will make sure you drool in a cup for the rest of your life while I enjoy my money with someone who appreciates it. Now get out of my face." The silence that followed was louder than the recording itself. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Judge Henderson slowly took off his glasses. He cleaned them with a small cloth, his movements deliberate and terrifyingly calm. He put them back on and looked down at the defense table. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, his voice barely a whisper. "Did your client just admit to bribing a medical professional to falsify a mental health diagnosis for the purpose of discrediting a witness?" Silas Blackwood stood up. He was pale. "Your Honor, I have not heard this recording before. I cannot verify its authenticity. It could be deep fake technology. It could be AI generated." "It's not AI," Jessica said from her table. She stood up, her voice stronger now. "Because I didn't come alone, Your Honor. I have a witness." "Who?" Bruno snapped his voice, cracking. "Who do you have? You have no friends. I isolated you from everyone." Jessica looked at the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors opened. A man walked in. He was disheveled. He wore a cheap suit that was 2 sizes too big. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He walked with a shuffle, his eyes darting around the room nervously. It was Dr. Oris Thorne. Bruno gasped. "No." "I call Dr. Aris Thorne to the stand," Jessica said. Silas Blackwood looked at Bruno. "You said he was in Europe. You said he was unreachable." "He was," Bruno hissed. "I paid for his plane ticket." Dr. Thorne took the stand. He refused to look at Bruno. He looked at the floor, his hands shaking as he took the oath. "Dr. Thorne," Jessica said, approaching the stand. "You treated me in 2018, correct?" "Yes," Thorne mumbled. "And you signed an affidavit submitted by Mr. Blackwood this morning, stating that I suffer from severe paranoid delusions. Is that affidavit true?" Thorne looked up at the judge. He looked at the bailiff who was standing near the door with a hand on his belt. Thorne swallowed hard. "No," Thorne whispered. "Speak up, Doctor," Judge Henderson barked. "No," Thorne shouted, tears welling in his eyes. "It's not true. She's sane. She's always been sane. I made it up." The gallery erupted. Reporters were furiously typing on their phones. "Why did you lie, Doctor?" Jessica asked gently. Thorne pointed a shaking finger at Bruno. "Because he told me to. He paid off my bookie. I owed 40 grand to some bad people. Bruno paid it. He told me to gaslight her. He told me to prescribe heavy sedatives to make her look confused in public. I needed the money. I'm sorry, Jessica. I'm so sorry." "Objection!" Silas roared, desperate to stop the bleeding. "This witness is clearly under duress. He is unreliable." "The only duress I see." "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Henderson said, his eyes narrowing, "is the perjury your client just suborned? Sit down before I have you joined as a co-defendant." Silas sat down. He moved his chair 6 inches away from Bruno. Jessica looked at her husband. Bruno was no longer the arrogant tycoon. He was sweating, his perfectly gelled hair starting to droop. He looked small. "I have no further questions for this witness," Jessica said. "Dr. Thorne," the judge said ominously, "you are not to leave this building. The bailiff will escort you to a holding room. The district attorney will be very interested in your testimony." As Thorne was led away, sobbing, the courtroom felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Jessica returned to her table. She had won the battle of character. She had proven she wasn't crazy, but she still had to prove where the money was and why it mattered. Because Bruno wasn't just hiding money from her, he was hiding it from everyone. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, his tone respectful now. "Do you have further evidence regarding the assets?" "I do, Your Honor," Jessica said. "But for this part, I'm going to need a calculator, and I'm going to need the court to look at the pension fund for the employees of Sterling Dynamics." Bruno's head snapped up. If looks could kill, Jessica would have been dead on the spot. The fear in his eyes wasn't just about divorce anymore. It was the fear of prison. "The pension fund," Silas Blackwood whispered. He turned to Bruno. "What did you do, Bruno? Tell me right now. If you lie to me again, I walk." "It's complicated," Bruno stammered. "I borrowed against it, just temporary, to cover the margin calls on the expansion." Silas closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "You embezzled from your employee's retirement to fund a shell company, Bruno, that's federal." "Mrs. Sterling, proceed," the judge ordered. Jessica walked to the projector. She placed a new document on the glass. It was a complex spreadsheet filled with rows of numbers and dates. "Exhibit D," Jessica announced. "This is a comparison of the employee contributions to the Sterling Dynamics 401k plan versus the actual deposits made into the custodial account at Chase Bank." She used a laser pointer, a cheap one she probably bought at a gas station, to circle a column. "From January 2022 to present," Jessica explained, her voice steady, "every employee had 5% of their paycheck deducted for retirement. That money was supposed to go to Chase Bank, but it didn't." She slapped another paper down. "This," she said, "is the ledger from Blue Ocean Holdings in the Cayman Islands. The dates match perfectly. January 15th, $400,000 deducted from payroll. January 16th, $398,000 deposited into Blue Ocean. He was skimming the retirement fund, laundering it through the Caymans to avoid taxes, and then using it to buy real estate under his mistress's name." The courtroom was buzzing. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a corporate scandal of massive proportions. "Mr. Blackwood," The judge said, his voice deadly calm. Does your client have an explanation for why the employee pension fund is empty? Silas stood up slowly. He looked tired. He looked like a man who realized his career might end today, along with his client's. Your Honor, Silas said, we request a recess. I need to confer with my client regarding potential criminal liability. Denied, Judge Henderson said instantly. We are in the middle of a trial. If your client wishes to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination regarding the embezzlement, he may do so. But that will allow me to draw an adverse inference regarding the marital assets. In layman's terms, Mr. Blackwood, if he stays silent to stay out of jail, he loses the divorce. If he speaks to win the divorce, he goes to jail. Choose. It was the ultimate checkmate. Bruno stood up. He shoved Silas aside. This is ridiculous, Bruno shouted. I am the CEO. It is my company. I can move capital wherever I want. I was going to pay it back. It was a bridge loan. A bridge loan unauthorized by the board, Jessica asked calmly from her table. Because I have the board meeting minutes here, Bruno. You never told them. In fact, you fired the internal auditor who asked about it last month, didn't you? Mr. Timothy Clark. Clark was incompetent. Bruno yelled, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. Just like you. You think you're so smart, Jessica. You think you can take me down. I built this empire. I am Sterling Dynamics. Without me, you are nothing. You're just a waitress. Mr. Sterling. The judge slammed the gavel. Control yourself. No. Bruno was unhinged now. The facade of the cool, collected billionaire had shattered. She hacked my computer. That's illegal. This evidence is inadmissible. Arrest her. I didn't hack your computer, Bruno, Jessica said softly. The room went quiet to hear her. I didn't have to, she continued. You linked your iPad to the family cloud account so you could upload photos of your trips with Tiffany. You were so arrogant you didn't even realize that every document you saved, every spreadsheet you edited, was backing up to the family server in the basement, the server I paid to install to store our wedding photos. She looked at him with pity. You took everything from me, Bruno. My dignity, my friends. You tried to take my sanity, but you forgot to change your iCloud settings. Some of the people in the gallery laughed. It was a nervous, shocked laughter. Silas Blackwood began packing his briefcase. Where are you going, Mr. Blackwood? Judge Henderson asked. I am withdrawing as counsel, Your Honor. Silas said, not looking at Bruno. My client has lied to me, implicated me in suborning perjury, and is currently confessing to federal wire fraud on the record. I am ethically bound to withdraw. You sit your backside down, Silas. Bruno grabbed his lawyer's arm. I pay you $1,000 an hour. You don't leave until I say so. Get your hands off me, Silas snarled, shaking him off. Mr. Blackwood, you will remain until this hearing is concluded, the judge ruled. But you are not required to suborn further perjury. Now, Mrs. Sterling, you have proven the assets exist. You have proven spousal abuse and fraud. What is your request for judgment? Jessica took a deep breath. She looked at the yellow pad where she had written her closing argument. She didn't need it. I don't want half, Your Honor, she said. Bruno froze. What I don't want half, Jessica repeated. I want it all. On what grounds? The judge asked, intrigued. On the grounds of dissipation of assets. Jessica cited the legal precedent. When one spouse maliciously wastes or hides assets to defraud the other, the court has the discretion to award 100% of the remaining estate to the victim. Bruno has emptied the pension fund. He has spent millions on his mistress. He has hidden the rest in the Caymans. If you give him half, he will flee the country. He has a flight booked to Brazil for tonight at 10 p.m. She held up a printout of an airline ticket. "Exhibit E," she said. Bruno checked his pockets frantically for his phone. He had booked that flight 2 hours ago during the bathroom break. "How did she have it? My iCloud," he whispered, horrified. "He is a flight risk, Your Honor," Jessica said. "I am asking for full control of the remaining liquid assets, the marital home, and the shares of Sterling Dynamics to be held in trust so that I can repay the employees he stole from." It was a noble move. She wasn't asking for the money for yachts. She was asking for it to save the workers. Judge Henderson looked at Bruno. He looked at the evidence. He looked at the weeping Dr. Thorne being led out the side door. "I am inclined to agree," the judge said. "Mr. Sterling, surrender your passport to the bailiff immediately." I left it at home." Bruno lied. "Bailiff, search him," the judge ordered. The bailiff stepped forward. Bruno backed away. "Don't touch me!" Bruno screamed. He looked at the exit. He looked at the window. He was a trapped animal. Suddenly the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a loud bang. Everyone turned. 6 men and women in navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering marched in. They were followed by 2 uniformed NYPD officers. The lettering on the jackets didn't say FBI. It said SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and behind them the DOJ, Department of Justice. The lead agent, a tall woman with a stern face, pointed at the defense table. "Bruno Sterling," she announced. "I am Special Agent Miller. We have a warrant for your arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." Bruno slumped into his chair. He looked at Jessica. Jessica didn't look away. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched. "I told you, Bruno," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her across the room. "I told you I wasn't crazy." But the drama wasn't over. As the agents moved to cuff Bruno, Silas Blackwood stood up. "Officer," Silas said, pointing at Bruno, "my client has just confessed to additional crimes on the court record. I suggest you get the transcript." "You traitor!" Bruno lunged at Silas. The chaos of Bruno Sterling's arrest took 20 minutes to clear. The sight of the billionaire CEO being dragged out in handcuffs, screaming obscenities at his own lawyer and wife was the kind of spectacle that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. When the doors finally closed, leaving the courtroom in a stunned, dusty silence, only a few people remained: Jessica Judge Henderson, the court reporter, and Silas Blackwood, who was frantically shoving papers into his briefcase, looking like a rat sensing the ship had already snapped in half. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Henderson said, his voice echoing in the empty room. Silas froze. "Your Honor, you are perilously close to being disbarred. If you want to save your license, you will cooperate fully with the court-appointed receiver. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal, Your Honor," Silas said, wiping sweat from his brow. He glanced at Jessica. For a moment, his eyes narrowed a look of calculation, not defeat, before he hurried out the side exit. Jessica stood alone at the plaintiff's table. She felt lightheaded. The adrenaline crash was coming. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said gently. Jessica looked up. "Yes, Your Honor. In light of the federal indictment and the freezing of Mr. Sterling's personal assets, the company Sterling Dynamics is effectively headless. The stock is going to freefall the moment the market opens tomorrow. Thousands of jobs are at risk." "I know," Jessica said. "That's why I asked for control." Judge Henderson nodded slowly. "I am granting you an emergency conservatorship over the voting shares held by the marital estate. Until the divorce is finalized or the criminal trial concludes, you are the majority shareholder. You are, for all intents and purposes, the owner of Sterling Dynamics." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "Be careful, Jessica. You just took down a wolf. but you're about to walk into a den of vipers. The board of directors won't welcome you with open arms. They will try to eat you alive." Jessica picked up her yellow notepad. She didn't look like the trembling woman who had walked in 3 hours ago. "Let them try," she said. 2 hours later, a black town car pulled up to the gleaming glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The logo of Sterling Dynamics was etched in steel above the revolving doors. Jessica stepped out. She hadn't changed clothes. She was still wearing the 5-year-old dress Bruno had mocked. But as she walked through the lobby, the atmosphere was electric with fear. Employees huddled in corners whispering. They had seen the news. They knew the FBI had raided the headquarters earlier that morning. When she reached the executive floor, the reception area was empty. The receptionist had fled. Jessica walked straight to the double doors of the boardroom. She could hear shouting from inside. She pushed the doors open. Around the massive oval table sat 12 men and 1 woman. The board of directors. They were arguing loudly, phones pressed to their ears, ties loosened. The room went silent as Jessica entered. "Who let you in?" barked Conrad Vance, the chairman of the board. Vance was a 70-year-old corporate raider with a reputation for stripping companies for parts. "Security, get this woman out of here." "Sit down, Conrad," Jessica said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. Vance scoffed. "Excuse me, do you know who I am?" "This is a restricted meeting. Go home and bake cookies, Jessica. Your husband is in jail and this company is under our control now." Jessica walked to the head of the table, Bruno's empty chair. She didn't sit. She stood behind it, placing her hands on the leather backrest. "Actually," she said, pulling the court order from her bag and sliding it down the polished table. "It's under mine." Vance snatched the paper. He read it, his face turning the color of ash. This is insane," Vance sputtered. "Henderson gave you the voting rights. You have no experience. You're a housewife." "I am the court-appointed conservator of the Sterling estate," Jessica corrected him, "which owns 51% of the voting stock. That makes me the chairwoman, and as my first act I am calling this meeting to order." "We won't stand for this," said another board member, a heavy-set man named Baxter. "We are filing an emergency motion to remove you. The stock is down 40% in 2 hours. We need to sell the logistics division to Amazon by end of day to save the capital." "No," Jessica said. "What do you mean, no?" Baxter stood up. "You don't understand business? We have a liquidity crisis. We have a corruption crisis," Jessica shot back. "And we are not selling the logistics division. That division employs 4,000 people in Ohio and Michigan. If you sell it, they lose their pensions because of the way Bruno structured the debt. I read the contracts, Baxter." The room fell silent again. They were looking at her differently now, not with respect, but with caution. "So what is your brilliant plan?" Vance sneered. "Hug the employees until the stock recovers." "No," Jessica said. "My plan is to cut the cancer out." She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of folders. She tossed one in front of Vance, one in front of Baxter, and one in front of the female board member, Linda Gray. "What is this?" Linda asked, opening the folder. That, Jessica said, is a record of the kickbacks you 3 received from the construction of the new warehouse in Nevada. You approved a bid that was 20% higher than the market rate, and coincidentally, the construction company is owned by your brother-in-law, Linda. Linda went pale. Jessica turned to Vance. "And you, Conrad. You've been short-selling Sterling stock for 3 months. You knew Bruno was cooking the books. You were betting against the company you were supposed to be protecting." Vance slammed the folder shut. "This is slander." "It's in the emails," Jessica said. "Bruno kept everything. He didn't trust you any more than you trusted him." She leaned forward, gripping the chair. Here is how this is going to work. Vance Baxter Gray, you are resigning. Effective immediately. You will cite personal health reasons. If you do, I won't hand these folders to the SEC agents who are currently downstairs seizing the servers. If you fight me, you'll share a cell with Bruno. Vance looked at the other board members. They looked away. He was alone. You're a witch, Vance hissed. I'm a wife who paid attention, Jessica replied. Get out. Vance stood up, grabbed his coat and stormed out. Baxter and Gray followed, heads bowed. Jessica looked at the remaining 9 board members. They sat perfectly still, terrified. Now, Jessica said, finally sitting in the leather chair. It was too big for her, but she filled the room with her presence. Let's talk about how we're going to pay back the pension fund. The first week of Jessica's reign as the interim CEO of Sterling Dynamics was a blur of adrenaline and caffeine. She had purged the board, stabilized the stock, and won the hearts of the employees. To the outside world, she was the victorious heroine. But inside the silent glass-walled executive suite on the 42nd floor, Jessica felt a gnawing unease. She was winning the war for the company, but she still didn't understand why the war had started in the first place. Why had Bruno, a billionaire tycoon, married a waitress from a diner in New Jersey? 10 years ago, it was 11:00 p.m. on a Thursday. The cleaners had long since departed, leaving the office in a heavy, pressurized silence. Jessica sat at Bruno's massive mahogany desk, staring at a painting of a 19th-century schooner on the wall. She remembered Bruno once bragging that he kept his real insurance behind that ship. She stood up, removed the painting, and found a wall safe. She punched in the code. Bruno's ego was so fragile, he used his own birthday, and the heavy steel door clicked open. There was no cash inside, just a stack of old hard drives, and a single weather-beaten notebook bound in red leather. Jessica took the notebook to the desk and clicked on the brass reading lamp. She opened the cover. It wasn't a ledger. It was a diary of sins. It catalogued bribes, illegal dumpings, and blackmail schemes going back 20 years. But as she flipped to the entries from 2014, her blood ran cold. Entry June 12th, 2014. Target identified Jessica Russo, daughter of Giovanni Russo, the union foreman holding the deed to the Secaucus wetlands. He won't sell. He claims the land is sacred to his family. SB says we need a workaround. Jessica's hands began to tremble. Russo was her maiden name. Her father Giovanni had been a stubborn, proud man who died penniless. Or so she thought. She turned the page, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Entry July 4, 2014. SB suggests the widower route. If Giovanni dies in state, the land goes to the daughter. If I marry the daughter, the land becomes a marital asset. We can bypass the union contracts. It's cleaner than a buyout. Jessica gasped a ragged sound in the empty room. The romance, the flowers, the way Bruno had accidentally bumped into her at the diner. It was never love. It was a corporate acquisition. She was nothing more than a deed with a heartbeat. But the next entry shattered her soul. Entry, August 15, 2014. Problem solved. The old man wouldn't get out of the road. SB was driving. It was messy but effective. Police report filed as a hit and run. No witnesses. We own the girl now. Tears blurred Jessica's vision. Her father hadn't died of a heart attack or a random accident. He had been murdered. Run down in the street like an animal so Bruno could build a parking lot. And the initials SB, Silas Blackwood. Buzz. The intercom on her desk jolted her so hard she nearly dropped the book. Mrs. Sterling? The night security guard's voice crackled. Mr. Blackwood is here. He says he has urgent papers regarding the plea deal. Jessica stared at the intercom, paralyzed. The murderer was in the lobby. "Send him up," she whispered, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. She had seconds. She shoved the red notebook into her purse. She slid her phone under a stack of files, hitting record on the voice memo app. She grabbed a can of pepper spray she had started carrying since the divorce began and hid it in her palm, concealing it under a file folder. The elevator chimed. The sound was deafening. Silas Blackwood walked in. He wasn't the polished lawyer today. He wore a dark trench coat, his eyes rimmed with red, looking like a man who had stared into the abyss and blinked. "Working late, Jessica," Silas said, closing the heavy oak door behind him. The lock clicked. "You're taking to the throne quite naturally." "What do you want, Silas?" Jessica asked. She stayed behind the desk, her fingers white-knuckled on the file folder. "I'm here to save you," Silas lied, walking toward the wet bar. He poured himself a scotch, his hand steady. "Bruno is cracking. He's going to trade everyone to the feds. Me, the board, you. But I can protect you, Jessica. I can make sure your name stays out of the indictment." "I haven't done anything wrong," Jessica said, watching him like a hawk. "It doesn't matter." Silas smiled a cold, reptilian expression. He walked around the desk, invading her space. "I need leverage. I need the notebook, Jessica." Jessica stopped breathing. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play the fool anymore." Silas sighed, leaning against the edge of the desk. "I tracked the biometric log. You opened the safe. You know about the land. You know about the accident." "It wasn't an accident," Jessica said, her voice shaking with rage. "You killed him. You killed my father." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Silas didn't deny it. He took a sip of his drink, looking bored. "It was necessary," he said simply. "Giovanni was an obstacle. We removed him, and you got a life of luxury in exchange." "Was it really such a bad trade?" "You are a monster," Jessica whispered. "I am a pragmatist," Silas corrected her. He set the glass down. "Now give me the book. If the DOJ gets that, it's a murder charge. I won't go down alone, Jessica. I'll plant evidence that you were driving the car. Who will they believe, the grieving widow or the greedy ex-wife?" He held out his hand. "The book. Now." Jessica looked at the door. It was 20 feet away. She looked at Silas. "Okay," she said, reaching into her purse. "You win." She pulled out the red notebook. Silas's eyes lit up with greed. He reached for it. Jessica tossed the book high into the air over his head. Silas's instinct took over. He spun around, lunging to catch the evidence before it hit the floor. In that split second, Jessica dropped the file folder, raised the pepper spray, and unleashed a stream of burning orange fire directly into his face. "Ugh!" Silas screamed, the sound primal and terrifying. He clawed at his eyes, stumbling back into the wet bar. Glass shattered. Jessica didn't hesitate. She grabbed the notebook from the floor and bolted. "You witch!" Silas roared, swinging blindly. "You're dead!" Jessica sprinted for the elevator, slamming her hand against the call button. "Come on, come on!" She could hear Silas stumbling down the hallway behind her, cursing in a blind rage. The doors opened. She threw herself inside and hit the lobby button. As the door slid shut, she saw Silas burst into the hallway, his face swollen and red, a shard of broken glass in his hand. The doors closed, sealing her in. But as the elevator descended, Jessica knew the nightmare wasn't over. She was trapped in a building with a killer, and there was nowhere left to hide. The elevator doors slid open with a cheerful ding that felt obscenely bright in the dark lobby. Jessica stumbled out into the cavernous space of marble and glass. It was usually bustling, but tonight it was a silent tomb. She sprinted toward the revolving doors, her heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. She pushed against the heavy glass. It didn't move. Panic surged in her throat. The night security protocol. The building automatically locked down at midnight. She checked her pockets frantically, but Bruno's access card was gone, dropped in the struggle upstairs. She was trapped. Jessica! The scream echoed down the elevator shaft, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps on the emergency stairwell door. Silas hadn't waited for the elevator. He had taken the stairs fueled by a murderous rage. Jessica dove behind the granite security desk, just as the stairwell door burst open. Silas Blackwood limped into the lobby. He looked monstrous. His eyes were red and streaming tears from the pepper spray, his skin blotchy and swollen. In his right hand, he gripped a jagged shard of heavy crystal, a makeshift dagger capable of lethal damage. "I know you're in here," Silas rasped, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "The doors are locked. You can't get out, and the police won't get here in time." Jessica crouched lower, clutching the red notebook to her chest. Her phone was still in her hand, the call with Agent Miller silent but connected. "You think you've won," Silas taunted, moving slowly toward the center of the room, hunting by sound. "You think because you found a diary, you can take us down. Bruno is weak. But I solve problems, just like I solved your father." He stopped. He heard her ragged breathing behind the desk. "Found you!" Silas lunged. Jessica screamed and scrambled backward, backing away toward the massive decorative fountain. Silas closed the distance, raising the glass dagger high, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "Give me the book, Jessica," he snarled. "And I'll make it quick." Jessica looked at the lethal shard of glass. Then she looked at the phone in her hand. "No," she said, her voice shaking, but defiant. "I'm not giving you the book, Silas, but I will give you an audience." She held up the phone. "Agent Miller, did you hear that confession?" A crisp, amplified voice cut through the silence. "We got it all, Mrs. Sterling. Look at the door." Silas froze. Crash. The glass revolving doors shattered inward as a SWAT armored truck rammed the entrance. Men in tactical gear swarmed through the opening lasers, cutting through the dust. "Federal agents, drop the weapon!" Silas Blackwood stood there, blinking in the blinding lights. Realizing it was over, he dropped the glass shard and fell to his knees in defeat. As the officers swarmed him, Agent Miller walked through the debris to where Jessica stood, trembling. "Mrs. Sterling." Jessica handed her the red notebook. "Here," she whispered. "The murder. The fraud. It's all in there." 6 months later, the fall of the Sterling Empire was absolute. Silas Blackwood, stripped of his immunity, due to the new evidence, was charged with first-degree murder. He died in prison 3 months into his life sentence. Bruno Sterling took a plea deal for 25 years, crying as he was led away in handcuffs. But the story ended where it began, with the land. On a crisp autumn morning, Jessica stood at the head of the Sterling Dynamics boardroom table. The corporate raiders were gone. In their seats sat truck drivers, shift managers, and secretaries. "This company was built on the land my father died for," Jessica told them. "Effective today, Sterling Dynamics is an employee-owned cooperative. You own the shares, you keep the profits." The room erupted in cheers. Jessica walked out of the building and drove to a quiet cemetery in New Jersey. She knelt before a simple gravestone, Giovanni Russo. "I got it back, Papa," she whispered, placing the court order on the grass. "I got the land back, and I made them pay." She stood up, wiping her eyes. She wasn't the waitress. She wasn't the victim. She was Jessica Russo, and she had never been stronger. They say that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but Jessica proved that fury isn't always loud. Sometimes it's organized, Bruno and Silas thought they were untouchable because they had money and power. They laughed at Jessica because she was just a housewife. But they forgot the most important rule: you never ever corner a survivor. Jessica didn't just win a divorce. She dismantled a criminal empire and exposed a murder. If you enjoyed this story of justice, served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a drama. Tell me in the comments, do you think 25 years was enough for Bruno? Thanks for watching.